She was sitting alone at the wedding until the millionaire whispered to her, "Pretend you're with me. Before the history begins, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from." Enjoy. The grand ballroom of the five-star hotel in Zurich was adorned with white roses and silver candles. Everything radiated such obvious luxury it felt almost overwhelming. Lucia Fernandez sat alone at a round table by the wall, trying to keep a calm expression even though her hands were slightly sweaty. Her navy blue dress hugged her slender figure, and the black heels she'd chosen made every step on the red carpet feel a bit awkward. She barely knew anyone there, except for her best friend Mariana, the bride, who at that moment was holding her new husband's hand, smiling brilliantly under the photographer's flashes. "Alone, right?" a woman at the next table asked with a half-smile. Lucia nodded with a brief grimace. She knew people were watching her. It wasn't the first time it happened at a wedding of that scale. The whispers began to flow as always. She came alone. She doesn't have a partner. She looks a little out of place, doesn't she? Lucia sighed and lifted her glass to her lips to hide her discomfort behind a sip of wine. Usually she didn't care about other people's looks. But that night, under the pressure of an atmosphere obsessed with appearances, her loneliness felt amplified to an almost unbearable level. She checked the time. It was barely 8 o'clock, far too early to leave without seeming rude. When she was about to stand up to get some fresh air, a tall man appeared beside her table and sat down decisively, as if the chair had always belonged to him. His features were sharp, his gaze piercing enough to make several heads turn at once. Lucia froze, startled, as the man leaned in and whispered in a deep voice, "Let's pretend you're with me." Lucia's heart jumped. "I'm sorry," she answered softly, drawing back a little. He wasn't looking at her directly, but instead kept his eyes fixed on a group of guests a few tables ahead. "They're talking about you, and about me, too. If you don't mind, let's pretend we came together." Lucia let out a brief laugh, somewhere between annoyed and amused. "So I'm supposed to play girlfriend to a total stranger?" That's when he turned his face toward her. His eyes were an intense grey, cold and calculating, but with a hidden spark that threw her off balance. He lowered his voice so close that Lucia caught the sandalwood scent at his collar. "Just pretend. Trust me. You'll avoid the awkward stares, and I'll dodge a matchmaking ambush I'm not interested in. We both win." Lucia bit her lip, wavering. Deep down, she knew he was right. Several looks had already shifted from mockery to curiosity. Now people seemed to think, oh, the girl sitting alone did have a date after all. "Fine," she said with a challenging half-smile. "But how far are you planning to take this little act?" He arched an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth barely curving. "Leave it to me." Then he draped his arm over the back of her chair with an intimacy so natural that several guests covered their mouths and giggled behind their hands. Lucia tensed. Danger, she thought. Thersman knows far too well how to play a part. "What's your name?" she asked in a low voice. "Alejandro Morel." The name was not unfamiliar. Lucia swallowed. He was the most feared young CEO in Switzerland's financial world, famous for his coldness and for mowing down anyone who stood in the way of his deals. "Seriously, I'm pretending to be Alejandro Morel's girlfriend," she thought. Before she could react, Hayes calmly refilled her wine as if they'd been a couple for years. "Relax," he said evenly. "Lucia Fernandez," she murmured. "I already knew," Alejandro replied quietly, locking eyes with her. "I have a good memory for faces worth remembering." Lucia had to look away. Her heart was beating too fast, and she couldn't tell if it was discomfort or something else. The rest of the evening turned into a kind of silent theater. When a guest approached their table, Alejandro introduced her as someone very special, his voice firm and eyes steady. Though nervous, Lucia played along and smiled as if everything were real. "You make a lovely couple," a woman remarked, her tone loaded with implications. Lucia almost burst out laughing. Me, a coffee-addicted financial journalist, supposedly on the arm of this arrogant magnate. But under the inquisitive stares, the role didn't feel so unbearable. Whenever she faltered, Alejandro would lean over to murmur a dry joke, or he'd deftly change the subject to save Themament. "You're a good actor," she whispered while serving herself dessert. "Who said I'm acting?" He shot back, flashing one of those tiny smiles that undid her. Lucia looked away, feeling heat rush to her face. Between the lights and the soft music, anyone would have sworn they were a real couple. She took another sip of wine and reminded herself it was all just an act. Tomorrow everything would go back to normal, yet deep down, a voice told her that simple whisper, "Pretend you're with me, Madei," marked the beginning of a story neither of them could foresee. Lucia thought the performance would endance the ballroom lights, dimmed, and the fireworks lit up the night. The next morning she'd return to her world of investigations, half-finished coffees, and endless spreadsheets, but life rarely lets things follow such a simple plan. 3 days later, as she was leaving the newsroom exhausted, a sleek black car pulled up in front of her. The window rolled down slowly, revealing a face far too familiar. Alejandro Morel. Lucia froze. "Don't tell me you came to buy the newspaper," she quipped, trying to hide her surprise. He checked his watch, unhurried. "If you're not busy, I need 5 minutes of your time." "Sounds like a political interview," she joked, but she still opened the door and got in. The luxurious interior stood in stark contrast to her scuffed city walking shoes. Alejandro didn't waste time on preliminaries. "Do you remember what he told you at the wedding?" "Impossible to forget," Lucia answered with a half-smile. I nearly choked from all those fake smiles in front of those ladies. The corner of his mouth lifted. "Here's the situation. The press and some investors are on my back. They think something's wrong with me, because I don't have a partner or a family. My stock shouldn't depend on that, but Thermos are insufferable." Lucia eyed him skeptically. "And you want me to keep pretending?" "Exactly." He held her gaze, unblinking. "I need someone intelligent who knows how to handle herself, who won't fall apart in front of the press." "At the wedding you played the role perfectly." Lucia let out an incredulous laugh. "What a compliment. Instead of 'you're beautiful,' you're going with 'you're a good actress.'" "Both are true," he said calmly, leaving her speechless. Silence filled the car for a few seconds. Lucia knew she should refuse. She had no time to play anyone's fake girlfriend. But then a thought crossed her mind. Through this charade, she'd gain access to the most powerful circles of the financial elite, the very place where the scandal her paper had been chasing for months was being cooked up. "Maybe this is the door I need," she thought. She propped her chin on her hand and pretended to ponder. "And how do you plan to compensate me for this role?" "Respect, discretion, and convenience," he replied without hesitation. "I'm not that cheap. Morel, I want the right to walk away when I'm fed up." A soft, rare laugh escaped him, like ice cracking under the sun. "Deal. And I reserve the right to end it if you turn into a PR disaster. The only disaster here is that suit so perfect. It makes everyone look at me as if I were clinging to you." She shot back. "Then I'll look at you with enough devotion to make them believe the opposite." His tone was flat, but a mischievous glint shone in his eyes. Lucia swallowed. This man really knew how to throw her off. "Temporary deal," she said at last, extending her hand. He took it firmly, warm and sure. "Just pretend, Fernandez." "Yes, pretend," she echoed. Though something inside her screamed she was stepping into a dangerous game. The first test came the next day. Alejandro took her to a charity gala at a museum in Geneva. "Are you sure about this? These are news who's, and I might trip on the red carpet," Lucia whispered as she stepped out of the car. "If you trip, they'll carry you." he said without a trace of humor. You realize lines like that don't help me focus? That's the point. He offered his hand like a gentleman from another era. When they entered the hall, every head turned. The murmurs rose immediately. Alejandro Morel has a girlfriend. Who is she? Lucia took a deep breath and smiled with poise. Act Fernandez. It's like writing an undercover piece. Alejandro leaned toward her ear, his voice brushing her skin. Your smile is better than at the wedding, less forced. You should try it too. Your stone face doesn't help, she murmured back. He let the slightest curve soften his expression. Like this. Lucia glanced at him sidelong and her heart stumbled. That half-smile is more dangerous than any falsified financial report. The gala unfolded, and to Lucia's surprise they moved like a real couple without a single misstep. Alejandro held her hand as he introduced her to executives, and she handled journalists with ease. When it was over, both sighed in relief in the car. I have to admit it, Lucia said. You were born for this. Alejandro adjusted his tie without looking at her. For everyone else, keeping cold works. With you, I don't have to pretend as much. Lucia had no words. She turned to the window to hide the smile tugging at Hermouth. Be careful, Fernandez, she told herself. This little game could stop being pretend sooner than you think. In the days that followed, Lucia's name circulated in Swiss high society, not for her journalism, but as Alejandro Morel's unexpected girlfriend. She kept asking herself, how did I end up in this mess? Each time she saw her reflection in a borrowed dress with invitations in her purse, she reminded herself, it's just an opportunity. Play the part, watch, gather proof. One Friday night, Alejandro took her Toei fundraising gala in an art museum. The hall glittered with dazzling lights. The paintings hung like chess pieces, and people moved with calculated strategy. Don't be nervous, he said as they entered, his hand steady at her waist. I'm not, she answered, just before catching her heel on the carpet. Alejandro caught her quickly, frowning. Careful. I don't want my fake girlfriend to be the joke of the night. Lucia shot him a withering look. You could simply say I look beautiful. He studied her with those cool eyes that sometimes warmed. You look beautiful, but your shoes are the traitors here. She bit her lip to suppress a laugh and slipped back into character. Throughout the evening, they had to be affectionate under everyone's gaze. Alejandro kept high executive composure, but whenever she fumbled, he covered for her with ease. At one point, she dropped a spoon into her wine glass, producing a clatter that made heads turn. She flushed at once. Without hesitating, Alejandro gently tapped his own glass with the spoon and gave an improvised toast. Her toast to tonight's success. The crowd followed with laughter and applause, wiping away the awkward moment. Lucia looked at him in amazement. So the infamous ice-cold executive does know how to save the day. He dipped his head. You did well, toe smile. It looked natural, so I should always smile fake. She teased. He didn't answer, only let that tiny curve appear again, the one that disarmed her, while pretending Lucia didn't forget her real objective. Whenever Alejandra was occupied with a partner, she drifted near tables to eavesdrop. One night by the buffet, she heard two businessmen whispering about transfers to Cayman Islands accounts. The detail lit her journalist's instinct. She memorized the company name and the figures they mentioned. Back at the table, Alejandro regarded her with suspicion. Where were you? Getting more dessert. She showed him a small mousse with an angelic smile. He watched her for a few seconds as if he could read her mind, then shook his head slightly. Don't disappear without telling me. Not even a fake girlfriend would. Lucia smiled, though inside she stayed on alert. He's sharper than I thought. As they walked through the gallery, Alejandro stopped in front of a painting in deep shades of blue. His voice, usually so firm, dropped suddenly. My mother loved this color. She said it reminded her of the sea from her childhood. Lucia looked at him, surprised. It was the first time she'd heard him say something so personal. She noticed his gaze was no longer cold but heavy, with memory. "I didn't think you'd talk about your family," she said. "Gently, nor did I think I would tonight," he murmured. That flash of vulnerability stirred something in Lucia. Suddenly Alejandro was no longer just the distant executive who wore coldness as armor. He was also a man with hidden corners, wounds he didn't show. On the way home, silence filled the car. Lucia toyed with the invitation in her bag, reminding herself she had to follow the Cayman money trail. But what if he's involved? She glanced at Alejandro, who stared out the window, expression blank. "What is it?" he asked, noticing her look. "Nothing. Just thinking about what to wear to keep playing your girlfriend tomorrow." Alejandro let the smallest smile soften his face. "Wear whatever makes you feel comfortable. I'll handle the rest." Lucia gave a faint smile, though inside she felt a storm. It was all an act, yes, but it felt more real every day. On Saturday night, Alejandro appeared outside her apartment in the same sleek car. She sighed when she saw him, impeccable as always. "What now? Another gala full of champagne and boring speeches?" she asked, settling into the seat. "No, this time will be different. Less wine, more music." 15 minutes later, they arrived at Arnold Theatre in downtown Geneva. The marquee read, "Special concert, Beethoven and Rachmaninoff." "You really brought me to a classical music concert," she said, open-mouthed. "My fake girlfriend also deserves a touch of reality." "Otherwise anyone could spot the script," he replied with all seriousness. She chuckled and followed him inside. The theatre gleamed with golden lights, high frescoed ceilings, and red velvet seats. When the lights dimmed and the orchestra began, the sound wrapped around her. Alejandro sat upright beside her, his face relaxed for the first time. Between pieces he whispered, "My mother used to play melodies like these at night. She'd tell me, 'Alejandro, you can be whatever you want, but never stop listening.'" Lucia watched him in silence. It was the first time she'd heard him speak supinely about his childhood. "And your father?" she asked carefully. "He was different." For him, silence was worth more than music. He believed a morale had to be strong, perfect, flawless. "Sounds suffocating," he turned toward her, grey eyes shining in the dim light. "It was. But without that demand I wouldn't be where I am. He left me no other option." Lucia bit her tongue to keep from reaching for his hand. She just smiled softly. "Maybe he forgot that sometimes the imperfect is what we remember most." Alejandro let out an almost imperceptible breath. "You may be right." After the concert, they walked to a small cafe near the square. Nothing fancy, wooden tables, warm lights, and the smell of fresh coffee. "I never thought I'd see Alejandro Morel in an ordinary cafe," Lucia teased as they sat. "Don't say it too loud. If anyone finds out, I'll lose my icy image," he deadpanned, taking a sip of cappuccino. She burst out laughing. Little by little, between jokes and quiet confidences, Lucia realized that behind the relentless executive was a man who could still surprise her. For a moment she almost forgot her mission. But when Alejandro stepped away to take a call, Lucia took the chance. She pulled out her phone and reviewed the photos she'd snapped. Donor plaques, contribution envelopes, sponsor lists. Several names-matched documents she was investigating about suspicious funds. Her heart hammered. "This is a breakthrough." She tucked the phone away just as he turned. "Everything okay?" he asked, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. "Yes, just thinking I should wear lower heels tomorrow so you stop teasing me about my stumbles," she answered lightly. He gave a sideways smile. "Then I'll have to hold your hand so your shoes don't betray you again." The words undid her, and she let out a nervous laugh. That night, back in her tiny apartment, she opened her laptop. The names she'd heard and the ones in her photos began to form a troubling pattern. I'm closer to the truth, she thought. Yet her mind wouldn't stop replaying what Alejandro had said about his mother. Her duty as a journalist clashed with something new growing in her chest. What if Morel is guilty? What if he isn't? Heart and conscience were starting a silent war. A few days later, combing through financial reports, Lucia froze. There was a company called CB Holdings, directly tied to shady transactions and transfers to tax havens. The detail that knocked the air from her lungs was the owner's name, Morel Group. She slumped back in her chair, head spinning. I'm pretending to be the girlfriend of the very owner of this suspect company. Her journalist's instinct screamed. This was her chance to blow the scandal open, but something in her heart whispered the opposite. The confusion followed her into the night Alejandro invited her to a private birthday. Fewer ties, fewer gowns, more cocktails, less formality. Lucia accepted. Thinking she might hear something useful, the party was nothing like she expected. Neon lights, jazz mixed with pop, laughter unbothered by appearances. Lucia sat at the bar, turning her glass in her hands. If I wrote a piece tomorrow titled, "The Ice-Cold CEO Dances Cha-Cha," the investors would faint, she taught, amused. What's making you smile to yourself? Alejandro asked, coming over with a whiskey and his tie loosened. Nothing. Just imagining headlines. Morel's drunken dancing causes a 3% market dip. He arched an amused brow. If that happened, I'd lose at least 10%. Lucia burst out laughing. She couldn't believe he had a sense of humor. The night wore on with music and drinks. When most guests had left, they stepped out together. Geneva's cool air brushed their faces as they descended stone steps lit by lanterns. A little dizzy? Lucia tilted her head. I can handle it, he said, though his steps had slowed. Suddenly he stopped and looked at her with a new intensity. His grey eyes warmer than usual. Lucia, don't, she stammered, stepping back half a pace until her back touched the wall. You make me forget this is just a script. And before she could react, Heki said her. It was short but intense, the taste of whiskey mixing with his unmistakable scent. Lucia stood still, heart pounding against her ribs. When he pulled back, he remained so close she could feel his breath on her skin. Are you crazy? She whispered, cheeks burning. Maybe, he answered with that fleeting smile that always unraveled her. Lucia lifted a hand to her lips, unsure whether to laugh or shout. Part of her thought, God, the ice-cold CEO just kissed me. Another part warned, don't forget about CB Holdings. Don't forget your mission. We keep pretending, she said in a shaky voice. Yes. He nodded, though his eyes said the opposite. But there are moments I don't want to act anymore. The ride back was silent. She stared out the window, mind in knots. She had a money laundering lead, and a kiss she couldn't shake. Let's play a game for the comments section. She thought for the audience. Write the word cookie in the comments. Only those who made it this far will get it. Let's continue. The night after the kiss, Lucia couldn't sleep. Her laptop glowed on the desk, illuminating a financial report she didn't dare reread. There was the name CB Holdings and signatures confirming suspicious transfers. The problem was everything pointed to the Morel Group. She covered her face with her hands, laughing bitterly. Great Fernandez. The same man who kissed you is the one you're supposed to investigate. On Monday at the newsroom, her desk mate approached in a low voice. Lucia, new information came in. Photocopies of documents. According to this, the final signature on CB's operations is Alejandro Morel's. Lucia's heart stopped for a second. Are you sure? 70%. They're not originals, just leaks. We still need confirmation. She nodded, trying to look calm, though. It felt like the air was leaving her lungs. Alejandro, the man who had just confided memories of his mother to her, the same man who had stolen a kiss that still made her tremble. Her journalist's mind screamed, "This is your chance." But her heart insisted, what if he's innocent? That afternoon she got an unexpected call. "Are you free?" Alejandro asked, his voice firm. "I want you to come to the group's headquarters. There's something I need to show you." Lucia hesitated, then accepted. It was also a chance to take a closer look. The Morel Group building rose over downtown Zurich, glass walls reflecting the city. Inside, Lucia felt she was crossing into another world. Dozens of employees walked with quick steps, each with an air of immaculate discipline. The elevator took them to the 50th floor. Alejandro's office looked like a modern museum, floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic views, a polished walnut desk, shelves of leather-bound books. Impressed, he asked, noticing her expression. "Add a kitchen and I'd move in," Lucia joked. He allowed the faintest smirk. "You wouldn't enjoy it. Working here isn't comfortable, but I want to show you something." He led her to a huge map of the world pricked with red pins. "This is my expansion plan," he said gravely. "Clean energy in Asia, biotech in Europe, online education in South America. I don't just want profit. I want to leave something of value for the next generation." Lucia listened, stunned. It wasn't the portrait of the icy wolf the media painted. He looked like a man dreaming of changing the world. "You sound like a Nobel candidate," she quipped, though inside her chest tightened. He smiled, a different light in his eyes. "Do you always have to hide behind sarcasm?" Lucia looked away, uncomfortable. Guilt pricked at her. While he opened his world to her, she had a flash drive in her purse that could ruin him. That night, Alejandro invited her to dinner at a lakeside restaurant in Lucerne. No journalists, no formal wear, just tables with candles and the soft murmur of water. Lucia scanned the menu without really reading it. Only one word kept blinking in her mind. Signature. "You okay?" Alejandro leaned toward her. "Yes, just hungry." "If you're hungry, we'll order the entire menu," he said so seriously that she couldn't help laughing. "Planning to diversify your empire into restaurants?" "If you agree to eat enough, maybe," he answered without missing a beat. For the first time in a long while she felt light, but every time their eyes met, the memory of the document returned like a shadow. After dinner, they strolled along the lake. Reflected lights shimmered on the water, almost unreal. "Don't you ever feel," he said suddenly, "like you're carrying impossible expectations? As if nothing is ever enough? Are you asking for you or for me?" "For both." He looked at her intently. "I've never met someone as independent and direct as you, and still I feel like protecting you." Color flooded Lucia's face. "You should drink less wine. It makes you say things that can be misinterpreted." "It's not the wine," he said, serious. She averted her gaze, heartbeat racing. Part of her wanted to shout, "Did you sign those papers?" But she couldn't. Not yet. Back in her apartment, she turned on her laptop and opened the scanned document. The strokes were clear, confident, identical to Alejandro's signature. It could be forged, or it could be real. She pressed her forehead into her hands, breathing fast. Justice or love, Fernandez choose. The dilemma tortured her all night. The next day, her editor called her into his office. Glasses low on his nose, desk buried under folders, tone brisk. "You have the signature, Lucia. What are you waiting for to write?" "It's not confirmed yet," she dodged, avoiding his eyes. He slammed the desk. "We can't wait. Either you deliver in a week or I pass it to someone else. Roberts will publish in 2 days and turn Morel into the perfect villain. Is that what you want?" Lucia froze. Roberts was a ruthless reporter known for destroying reputations in a handful of lines. "All right," she said at last. "I'll write it." She left his office with legs like lead, as if shackled. That night, staring at a blank screen, she couldn't type a single word. "What are you doing, Fernandez?" she asked herself. Her professional conscience pushed her, but her heart resisted. Alejandro didn't fit the image of a criminal, yet there was that signature. She glanced at the box holding the pen he had given her days before, her name engraved on it. A knot tightened in her chest. If he was innocent, a rushed article would destroy him. If he was guilty, falling in love would be her greatest shame. Days passed, rumors swelling in the newsroom. They say Fernandez has their scoop of the year. If Roberts takes it, Morel is done. Lucia pressed her lips together. She decided that if anyone was going to write that story, it would be her. That way at least she could buy time and maybe find the truth. She entered the editor's office with a firm voice. "I'll do it." "The article is mine," he smiled, satisfied. 1 week. Not a day more. Lucia left with her heart pounding. She had sealed her own fate. That night she wrote and deleted text messages over and over. "We need to talk about your company." Delete. "I have something important to tell you." Delete. She finally sent, "I need to see you alone." The reply came in seconds. "Tomorrow. My office." Lucia set the phone down, chest tight. She knew everything could explode the next day. Morning broke bright over Zurich, but for Lucia the sun meant nothing. She had barely slept, and every time she closed her eyes she saw 2 images. Alejandro's signature on CB Holdings documents, and the way he had looked at her the night of the kiss. When her phone buzzed, her heart lurched. "Come down." "I'm waiting." She read the message again and again. Alejandro was outside her building. A knot formed in her throat. She didn't even have time to react before someone knocked. When she opened the door, he was there, filling the frame with his height and that presence that seemed to command any space. His gray eyes were colder than ever. "Alejandro," she began. "Don't say my name like you have the right," he cut in, voice rough, every word like a knife. "You approached me only for your story, didn't you?" Lucia felt the floor vanish beneath her feet. "I told you things I've never told anyone. I took you to my home. I introduced you to Isabel and you—" His voice broke for an instant, then hardened again. "You're the reporter digging into my company." Lucia drew a deep breath, hands trembling. "Yes, I came to you for my work. I found irregularities, yes. And do you think I'm guilty?" "That I'm just another swindler?" His voice thundered with anger. She pressed her lips together, eyes burning. "I don't know. I have evidence with your signature. I can't ignore it, but I can't ignore what I feel either. I don't want to believe you're guilty." The silence was brutal. Only the echo of her own heart filled the space. Alejandro looked at her as if trying to decipher her, but all that escaped him was a bitter laugh. "And you expect me to trust you after all this? You made me a joke. I, who never trusted anyone, fell for a reporter's trap. Alejandro, please listen." "It's over, Lucia. I don't want to see you again." He turned and left, the door slamming shut in the quiet. Lucia collapsed into a chair, face buried in her hands. Everything had shattered in an instant. For a second, she thought of dropping the piece, deleting the files, quitting. But her conscience whispered, "If he's guilty, you can't stay silent. And if he's innocent, the truth will save him." She drifted through the newsroom like a ghost. Her colleagues murmured. Her boss pressed, and her laptop screen mocked her with its blinking cursor. She typed a few lines and erased them. At night she stared out her small apartment window. Somewhere in the city, Alejandro was in his glass office, distant and unreachable. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered into the dark. The following days were a whirlwind. Speculation filled the media. Morel's name was on everyone's lips, and High Empire teetered. Roberts was eager to steal her story. One night, while checking emails in a nearly empty cafe, Lucia received an anonymous message. "The real culprit is Ernesto Vidal. Be careful." Attached was a file with contracts, transfers, signatures, everything pointing to the group's vice president. The man Alejandro trusted most. Lucia went cold. If that was true, Alejandro had been betrayed from within, and she had accused him in her heart. When she left the cafe with the folder in her bag, she realized someone was following her. Heavy footsteps shadowed her under the street lamps. 2 men blocked her at the corner. Mr. Vidal says to stop digging. "You don't want to disappear, do you?" one said with a crooked smile. Lucia backed up, pulse racing. "Child, don't scare me." One raised his hand. The metallic glint of a weapon flashed in the light. Lucia swallowed, frozen. An engine roared. A black car screeched to a stop and the door flew open. Alejandro stepped out, tall, imposing, dark suit, eyes like steel. "Try touching her," he said in a low voice. He didn't need to shout. His tone was enough to make the men glance at each other and slink back into the shadows, cursing under their breath. Lucia slumped against the wall, shaking. "How did you know where I was?" she asked, her voice breaking. Alejandro didn't move, his gaze fixed on the corner where the men had vanished. "I make a habit of not abandoning someone who once stood by my side." His tone was cutting, without a trace of tenderness. Lucia wanted to scream that he wasn't guilty, that she had proof against Vidal. She wanted to pull the documents from her bag and show him. But his eyes were so cold, so unreachable, the words lodged in her throat. "Alejandro, don't say anything. I saved you because I won't have your blood on my hands, nothing more." The stab was direct. Lucia clenched her fists as tears blurred her eyes. "You don't believe me," she whispered. He let out a harsh laugh. "After all you expect me to trust you?" "Forget it." He turned and walked to the car. She watched him disappear into the night, heart in pieces. Alone, tears streamed down her cheeks. "You don't believe me, but I'll prove it. I'll clear your name even if you never want to see me again." That same dawn she opened her laptop and began to type with trembling fingers. She knew Ernesto. Vidal wouldn't sit still. That she was risking her career, and maybe her life, but also that it was the only way to save the truth and the man she loved. Dawn found Lucia at her computer, eyes red with fatigue, heart pounding. For her she wrote and deleted, searching for a way to expose Ernesto Vidal without destroying Alejandro. At last, she had a draft with the strongest facts. Illegal transfers, forged signatures, documents pointing directly to the vice president. When it went live, the city exploded. The headline wasn't flashy, but every word hit like lead. The real responsible party behind the Morel Group scandal, Ernesto Vidal. Lucia detailed how funds had been diverted, presented evidence of altered signatures, and made it clear Alejandro had been the victim of an inside betrayal. The article spread like wildfire. Newspapers reprinted it, newscasts debated it, and the group's stock stopped plunging. But Ernesto wouldn't go quietly. That afternoon, as Lucia left the newsroom, with her bag on her shoulder, a dark car blocked her path. She had no time to react. Someone grabbed her and a chemical-soaked cloth covered her mouth. The world went blurry. She woke tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse. The air smelled of rust and damp. In front of her, with venomous calm, stood Ernesto Vidal. "Miss Fernandez," he said with an icy smile, "I'm disappointed. I warned you to stay out of what doesn't concern you." Lucia pressed her lips together, though her voice trembled. "Do you really think you can hide the truth forever?" "The truth?" Ernesto flipped open a shiny knife, turning it slowly between his fingers. "Truth exists only as long as the person holding it stays alive. And you, miss, are an obstacle." Lucia swallowed. Terror choked her, but she gathered what strength she had. "I'd rather die than let you keep dragging Alejandro's name through the mud." Ernesto's eyes hardened. "Stubborn." "I hate stubborn." A thunderous noise erupted, the growl of an engine, then shouts of police. The door burst open. Alejandro entered first, followed by several officers. "Let her go, Vidal," he roared, fury in his voice. Ernesto reacted at once, pressing the blade to Lucia's throat. "One more step and I'll kill her right here. Alejandro's heart nearly stopped. Every fiber in him screamed to rush forward, but he held back, grey eyes burning. "Don't do it, Ernesto. You can still turn yourself in. Don't ruin your life further." "My life?" Ernesto laughed bitterly. "I built everything for you, Morel. I kept your company standing, and now you repay me by handing me to the police." "You sold yourself," Alejandro rasped. "I never asked for betrayal." The tension was knife-sharp. The police inched closer, waiting for a chance. Lucia felt the cold edge against her skin, but she didn't look away from Alejandro. "Alejandro," she breathed, barely audible. That whisper was enough. Instinct took over. Alejandro lunged the instant Ernesto hesitated. He yanked Lucia free and shoved her back out of the blade's path. A gunshot cracked. Officers tackled the vice president in seconds. Lucia hit the floor, gasping. A hot sting seared her arm and she saw blood stain her blouse. "Lucia!" Alejandro cradled her, face shattered. His mask of coldness was gone. "I'm all right, it's just a cut," she whispered, though her voice was faint. "Don't close your eyes, do you hear me?" "Don't you dare leave me," he said in desperation, pressing his hand to the wound to stop the bleeding. Paramedics rushed in, lifting her onto a gurney. Alejandro climbed into the ambulance, never letting go of her hand. As the sirens wailed, he murmured like a prayer, "Please, God, don't take her from me. I'll give up everything. The company, the money, the reputation, just let her live." At the hospital, the ER doors slammed shut, and Alejandro was left outside, shirt bloody, hands shaking. He had never felt such fear. Minutes crawled until at last a doctor emerged. "She's stable. The wound isn't deep. She will recover." Air rushed back into Alejandro's lungs as if he'd been drowning. Hours later, he entered the white room where Lucia rested on an IV. He sat and took her hand in both of his. His grey eyes whirred, exhausted, stripped of their usual hardness. "I'm sorry," he whispered against her skin. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you for leaving you alone. Forgive me." The silence broke when she moved her fingers and her lashes fluttered. Hair leaned in, heart in a fist. "Lucia," she opened her eyes slowly. "Ah, Alejandro, I'm here. I'm not leaving your side." She drew a breath, tired but conscious. "So I'm still alive." He let out a shaky, relieved laugh. "More than ever. And I'm not letting you go." Tears slid down Lucia's cheeks. "I hid things too. I approached you with a purpose, and then my heart betrayed me. I didn't want to fall in love with you, but I did." Alejandro rested his forehead on her hand, voice breaking. "From the day you almost tripped in those heels, I knew my life wasn't mine alone anymore. But I was too proud to admit it." Lucia smiled weakly. "The great Alejandro Morel talking about heels and pride. That's a headline." He smiled, eyes wet. "I don't want to pretend anymore. I want this to be real, that the whole world knows you're the woman of my life." Lucia squeezed his hand with the little strength she had. "Then promise me one thing. Don't leave me alone ever again." "I swear, never." That night, in the quiet of the hospital, they understood there were no more roles to play and no walls to keep standing. Whatever had begun between them, no matter how strangely, was real. Let's make another inside joke for those who only skim the comments. Write the word chocolate. Those who made it this far will get it. On we go. The next days passed with bandages, checkups, and sleepless nights. Lucia recovered little by little, and Alejandro barely left her side. He turned the room into an improvised office, reviewed reports by the window, took calls in a low voice, and even tried to peel an apple, doing it so clumsily that Isabel, his sister, couldn't help laughing. "If Dad saw you using a knife like that, he'd pass out," she joked, taking the fruit from him. From the bed, Lucia smiled, warmed by the domestic scene. Alejandro, always so impeccable, now looked endearingly human. "I've never done this for anyone," he admitted with a half-smile. "Fail special." Lucia met his eyes, realizing he was no longer the cold man everyone talked about. Days later, when she was finally discharged, Alejandro took her hand, handed her to a car that drove straight to the garden of the family residence in Lausanne. There, in front of dozens of journalists, he announced what many were waiting for: a conference to clear his name. Flashes popped as Alejandro stood at the podium, impeccable in a dark suit. "I'm Alejandro Morel," he began, voice steady, "and I want to make something clear. I am not guilty of the crimes attributed to me. The real culprit, Ernesto Vidal, is already in custody, and I must thank a person who, risking her life, brought the truth to light." He turned, extending his hand. Lucia, in a simple dress with her arm still bandaged, stepped forward. The murmur of the press became a roar. Alejandro held her firmly and looked at her as if nothing else existed. "She is Lucia Fernandez," he said, "and she is the woman I want at my side." Photographers captured every gesture, every glance. To the world, she was no longer the incognito journalist who had slipped into a glittering ball. She was the woman who had saved the most powerful man in Swiss finance. Lucia's knees trembled, but the resolute light in Alejandro's eyes told her there was no turning back. That night, far from the press, they turned to the residence. Isabel was waiting with a smile that mixed relief and mischief. "At last," she said, hugging Lucia. "I thought my brother would live in his ice tower forever." Lucia blushed and laughed. Alejandro snorted softly, but he didn't let go of Lucia's hand for a second. The days that followed were strange for both of them. For the first time, they didn't have to pretend. They walked in the garden, shared quiet breakfasts, and sometimes Alejandro surprised her with comments so unexpected that Lucia couldn't stop laughing. One afternoon, as he fastened a necklace around her shoulders, she rolled her eyes. "Fair seem like my stylist." "Not a stylist," he corrected softly. "Just a man who appreciates beauty." Lucia bit her lip to contain a nervous smile. This Alejandro, the one who let himself be tender and direct, was far more dangerous to her heart than this cold executive. But amid the calm, Lucia's conscience wouldn't let her rest. She remembered every lie, every omission. Yes, she had unmasked Vidal, but she had also used Alejandro to reach the truth. Though he claimed to have forgiven her, she felt the need to confess everything clearly. One night, as they walked along the Lucerne pier, she gathered her courage. "Alejandro, there's something I need to tell you." He looked at her attentively. "I'm listening. When I met you, all I cared about was the story, finding proof, getting to the bottom of what was happening at your company. And yes, I approached you with that objective." He didn't respond at once. He walked a few more steps, hands in his pockets, the breeze ruffling his hair. "I know," he said at last. "I always knew, Lucia." She looked at him puzzled. "How?" "Your eyes were never those of a woman who only wanted to shine at parties. You observed. You listened. You analyzed everything. I noticed from the wedding." Lucia lowered her head, ashamed. "I'm sorry. I used you, though after a while I couldn't control it." Alejandro stopped and framed her face in his hands. "Stop apologizing. Yes, a third. But in the end you were also the only one who trusted I wasn't guilty, and the only one willing to risk her life for me." She felt tears rise, but he quieted them with a kiss on her forehead. "Now I want what we have to depend on, no pretense or secret missions. I want you to be my truth, not my lie." Lucia hugged him tightly, as if that embrace could erase past wounds. Days later, Alejandro surprised everyone with an unexpected choice. He invited only family and close friends to an intimate ceremony in the Garden of Terracidence. No excessive luxury, not thousands of guests, just roses, white ribbons, and a sunny afternoon. Lucia stood behind the glass doors to the garden in a simple white dress without extravagant adornment. Isabel was with her, adjusting the veil with a conspiratorial smile. "Breathe, Lucia. My brother is out there waiting for you, more nervous than you." Lucia let out a nervous laugh. "Alejandro, nervous? I want to see that." The music began and the doors opened. Lucia walked slowly along the petal-strewn aisle. The crowd was small, but every eye turned to her. At the end stood Alejandro in a flawless black suit, grey eyes shining brighter than ever. His expression, once a wall, was now open, vulnerable, moved. The officiant began with simple words. "Today we aren't celebrating a game or a show. Today we witness a true love." Lucia squeezed Alejandro's hand, heart about to burst. "I pretended at the start," she said in a trembling voice. "But soon I understood what I felt wasn't a role, it was real. I promised to stand by you in light and in darkness, and for the record I promised to choose better shoes so you don't suffer." Soft laughter rippled through the guests. Alejandro smiled too, that rare smile Lucia had learned to love. "I thought I had to be perfect and cold to protect everything," he confessed. "But with you, I learned the only perfect thing is to be ourselves. I promise to believe you even when the world doubts." "You may kiss," the officiant said gently. Alejandro leaned in and brushed her lips with his. Applause burst forth. Isabel clapped through tears and laughter. Lucia felt the weight of doubt and masks crumble in that instant. There was no longer any need to pretend. The garden still smelled of roses when the ceremony ended. There was no massive banquet, no hundreds of guests, just one long table beneath warm lights, wine glasses, quiet laughter, and the people who truly mattered. Isabel raised her glass with an emotional smile. "To my brother, who swore he'd never marry, and to Lucia, who had the courage to break his ice wall." The guests applauded amid laughter. Lucia blushed, but Alejandro, far from uneasy, tilted his glass toward her. "To us." Afternoon turned to night, and the garden slowly fell quiet. With no photographers or murmurs, Alejandro led Lucia to the wooden pier stretching over the lake. Moonlight rippled on the water as if everything were a dream. "Do you see how ironic this is?" Lucia said with a nervous laugh. "It all started with pretending, and now nothing is more real," he answered, slipping his arm around her waist. Lucia looked into his eyes and saw no trace of the distant executives he had met. That Alejandro had become a man who could smile, make mistakes, even show fear. "You promised not to let go of me," she whispered, "and I'll keep it," he replied before kissing her under the starry sky. The days that followed were a breath after the storm. Lucia moved into Therasidens and discovered a completely different Alejandro. The man who argued with her about breakfast, who preferred quiet coffee and a newspaper, who got irritated when he couldn't find his silver cufflinks. "I never thought I'd see you digging between cushions like a mischievous kid," she teased one morning as her image through the sofa. "And I never thought I'd have someone laugh at me in my own house," he retorted, lips betraying a smile. Lucia also learned to live with external pressure. The media labeled her the journalist, who became the magnate's wife. Some praised her, others criticized her, but she decided not to let headlines dictate her life. One afternoon, Alejandro arrived home early and found her working on her laptop, surrounded by papers. "You're still a journalist even though you don't need to be," he observed, folding his arms. "I don't do it out of need. I do it because it's who I am," she answered without looking up. He came closer and closed the laptop gently. "Then don't give it up. But promise me you won't risk your life alone again." Lucia met his eyes seriously. "And you promise me you'll never doubt me again?" Alejandro nodded without hesitation. "I learned my lesson." The house grew warmer. Isabel visited often, always joking about how Lucia had humanized her brother. "You used to be insufferable," she laughed. "Now you even know how to smile." Alejandro snorted, But Lucia noticed such comments no longer bothered him. If anything, he seemed to relish the idea that he'd changed. Love, however, didn't erase challenges. Alejandro still had to restore his company's image and rebuild partner trust. Lucia, for her part, faced colleagues who accused her of selling out to the man she'd investigated. One night, exhausted by the rumors, she fell onto the bed with a sigh. "They say I betrayed my profession for you," she murmured. "You owe them no explanations," Alejandro said, lying beside her and stroking her hair. "You're the reason the truth came out, and truth is all that matters." Lucia hugged him tight. "Promise me that no matter what happens, we won't lose this." "I promise," he said, kissing her forehead. A few days later they decided to return to where it had all begun, the Zurich hotel where Mariana, Lucia's best friend, had married. No formal wear, no orchestra, just the two of them walking hand in hand into the same chandelier lithal. "This is where you asked me to pretend," Lucia said with a smile. "And this is where I realized my life would change forever," Alejandro answered. They stood in silence for a moment, looking at the empty room. It felt like closing a circle. What had started as an absurd agreement was now the bedrock of a love that had survived betrayal, danger, and doubt. On the way home, Alejandro surprised her with a small package. "What's this?" Lucia asked, opening it. Inside was a pair of low-heeled shoes, elegant but comfortable. "So you never trip again," he said with a mischievous smile. Lucia laughed, moved. "You're impossible, and you love me that way," he replied, leaning in to kiss her. Life together was just beginning. It wouldn't be perfect, but there were no more masks or lies. Only the two of them learning to be a couple beyond the headlines. That night, as fireworks sparkled over the lake, Lucia rested her head on Alejandro's shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, the word future didn't frighten her. Time passed, bringing new routines that, to Lucia's surprise, proved more precious than grand events. It wasn't galas or press conferences that showed how much their lives had changed, but the small moments: breakfast together, with sunlight pouring through the windows, walking barefoot in the garden after rain, arguing about who cooked better, even though they both knew Alejandro could barely fry an egg. One autumn afternoon they strolled through downtown Geneva without bodyguards or luxury cars. It was strange for both to feel anonymous in the crowd, but also liberating. Lucia bought an ice cream and handed it to Alejandro. "Come on, try it." He raised a brow. "Ice cream in their street? I'm a Morel. You're my husband, and you're going to try it." Alejandro sighed with feigned resignation and took a spoonful. His expression softened into an unexpected smile. "It's good." Lucia burst into laughter. I can't believe it. Alejandro Morel discovers vanilla ice cream in the middle of this street. That deserves a headline." He shook his head, but a different brightness shone in his grey eyes, the look of a happy man. Past wounds didn't vanish overnight. There were tense moments with partners who still doubted, journalists who questioned their relationship, employees adjusting to change. But little by little, with patience and transparency, Alejandro proved his empire wasn't built on lies. Lucia, meanwhile, found her voice again as a journalist. She kept writing, choosing her battles carefully, publishing reports on corruption at other firms, financial abuse, and overlooked human stories. Each time she did, Alejandro read in silence and left a brief note on her desk. "I'm proud of you." One night, dining on the terrace, Lucia gazed at the stars. "You know what I sometimes think?" she said softly. "That it could all have ended badly, that if you hadn't walked up to me at that wedding, I'd be somewhere else writing anonymous pieces, and you'd still be the Iceman everyone feared." Alejandro set down his fork and looked at her steadily. "Maybe, but I'm glad I'd read, even if it was with a single whisper. Lucia smiled, remembering the moment that changed everything. She imitated his deep voice. "Pretend you're with me. And look where the most sincere lie of all took us," he replied, leaning in to kiss her. Autumn advanced and rumors finally faded. People stopped seeing them as a scandal and started seeing them as a couple that had survived everything. Lies, danger, fear. On a random Sunday, they hosted a small garden gathering with friends and some of Lucia's former colleagues. Among them was Mariana, the friend whose wedding had started it all. "I still can't believe it," Mariana said, hugging her. "It all began because you were sitting alone at my wedding." Lucia laughed. "And now look at me, married to the man who asked me to pretend for a few minutes." Mariana winked. "Sometimes the unexpected is the best thing that can happen to us." At nightfall, Alejandro took Lucia's hand and led her to the lake's edge. Light reflections shimmered on the calm water. "I want us to always remember this," he said seriously, "that even in the middle of the storm we chose to believe in each other." Lucia squeezed his hand. "And that we stopped pretending so we could start truly living." They stood in silence watching their stars. No more masks, no more doubt, only a shared future. And that night, as fireworks lit the sky over the lake, Lucia and Alejandro held each other with the certainty that there were no doubts left. Theirs was forever. Thank you for staying with us to the end of this story. Tell us in the comments what impacted you most and give it a rating from 0 to 10. If you enjoyed it, like the video, subscribe, and turn on the bell to get our next stories. And if you want more, click the story on screen. You'll be hooked from the first minute. Music.